Hungary's Minister of Foreign Affairs, Péter Szijjártó, has sharply criticized the European Union's handling of the Ukraine war, calling it a terrible and tragic failure. In an interview with the Spanish newspaper El Debate, Szijjártó claimed that despite the EU pouring billions into Ukraine's defense, the war has not yielded the intended results. Instead, he argued, Russia is gaining ground while Ukraine is retreating, raising doubts about the EU's long-term strategy. He accused Brussels of pursuing a flawed approach that has failed to deter Russia while imposing significant economic and security burdens on Europe.
Hundreds of billions of euros have been paid to the Ukrainians, and weapons worth hundreds of billions of euros have been sent to Ukraine. And what has been the result? Russia is gaining ground, and Ukraine is retreating. Hundreds of thousands of people have died. That's why we need to stop now.
Szijjártó asserted that a battlefield victory for Ukraine is unrealistic and that a negotiated settlement is the only viable path forward. He suggested that a shift in US leadership, particularly the return of former President Donald Trump, could change the course of the war and lead to peace talks.
There is no solution on the battlefield. The only solution lies around the negotiating table. That's why we hope that President Trump will be strong enough to change the course and reach some kind of agreement.
Beyond military aid, Szijjártó criticized EU-imposed sanctions on Russia, arguing that they have inflicted significant economic harm on European nations, including Hungary, while failing to weaken Moscow. Budapest has frequently clashed with Brussels over its reluctance to support sanction packages, citing their negative impact on Hungary's economy. Under Prime Minister Viktor Orbán, Hungary has positioned itself as a vocal critic of the EU's Ukraine policy, frequently blocking or delaying key decisions on military aid and sanctions. Budapest argues that diplomatic efforts, rather than continued military support, should be the priority.
Well, first of all, the Americans and the Europeans are saying two diametrically opposed things. The Europeans are saying that the sanctions should be continued, and even intensified, in order for the Ukrainians to win the war in Russia. Yesterday, the American Secretary of State said in a major interview that it was dishonest to deceive the world by claiming that the Ukrainians could win this war. This is worth following this great interview. That's why the Americans don't want sanctions but peace. So the Europeans want sanctions instead of peace.
Under Prime Minister Viktor Orbán, Hungary has positioned itself as a vocal critic of the EU's Ukraine policy, frequently blocking or delaying key decisions on military aid and sanctions. Budapest argues that diplomatic efforts, rather than continued military support, should be the priority. Orbán has framed his opposition to sanctions as a defense of Hungary's national interests. He argues that Budapest has already suffered significant economic losses due to EU policies and that it is now time to push back. He warns that if Brussels fails to provide guarantees that Hungary will not bear further economic consequences, his government may take action to lift the sanctions altogether.
Now we have to speak in this tone, and in this strong context, otherwise they will look at us as suckers. And in the end, the Hungarian people will continue to pay the price of the sanctions. And even the Ukrainian impudence that while we finance their wars, we provide the money for the operation of their country. They take steps that make the lives of Europeans, including Hungarians, more difficult. Well, this is unacceptable.
Szijjártó's remarks intensify the EU debate on military aid versus diplomacy. With elections looming in Europe and shifting US politics, Ukraine's future remains uncertain. Hungary's contrarian stance, while divisive, reflects broader concerns over the EU's long-term strategy.